You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easy to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language too.
I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy.
I know Putin very well from the days when I was Prime Minister. In the Netherlands, you have to test him. And you did this. And you really gave him a chance to be serious, to get to the table.
Well, as we told you at the top of the program, President Trump is sending additional weapons to NATO countries for distribution to Ukraine. It's part of his effort to try to end the war with Russia. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was on hand for that announcement, as you saw in the Oval Office. He joins us on set tonight. Mr. Secretary General, thanks for being here.
Good to be on the program.
What's your takeaway from your meeting today and that announcement and how significant it is?
This is really significant. So last Thursday, I got a call from President Trump. He said, hey, Mark, we really want to ramp up the support for Ukraine when it comes to weapons. And then this morning I was in the White House preparing for the meeting with him, and he said when it comes to the sanctions, clearly we have to take the next step now. And he can only dialogue once, so he has to take this step by step. I totally understand that. But he was really, I think, irritated with his last phone call with Putin, who is not serious, it seems, about getting into peace deals, to peace negotiations.
So now there's a 50-day deadline. Essentially, the president put that on the table today. And you think that the sanctions on other countries doing deals with Russia will create additional pressure, exponential?
Absolutely. This is significant. So today, if you are in Beijing or in Delhi, or you're in Brazil and you know that this is coming to you, you might want to call Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and say, hey friend, we are still buying stuff from you, but you have got to get serious when it comes to these negotiations on a ceasefire or a peace deal, or otherwise we get hit by these secondary sanctions. There will be also an effect directly on Russia, of course. But this is really significant, and it is smartly designed by the president.
What about the weapons themselves? Why not the U.S. directly to Kyiv? Why through European countries in NATO?
Well, there are two sides to this. One is the logistics, and NATO is good at logistics. So get the weapons into Ukraine in a way that they can make maximum use of them. So packaged in packages which are really useful, and for them to be maximum effective. And then, of course, is the issue of who is paying for it. And the president, and I totally understand this, he said, hey, listen, Mark, we want to deliver these weapons into Ukraine, making sure that they can sustain in the fight, that they somehow are able to defend themselves against the Russians. But you guys in Europe have to pay for it. And I think that's fair. We had the NATO summit, which was a huge foreign policy success for President Trump. Europeans stepping up. And here again, the Europeans are stepping up, taking responsibility to pay for these weapons.
You know, Vladimir Putin has shown no indication he's going to stop this. And obviously, you've talked to the president about how much these phone calls have irritated him. We have this chart that shows the number of attacks, drone and missile strikes on Ukraine, sometimes right after these phone calls, going up. So what is it going to take? How much more support for Ukraine to get to the table, the negotiating table, to push Russia to that point?
But this is why today was so significant, because three things are happening at the same time. We know that the Russian economy is not in a terribly good shape. And so that is already taking place, this economic impact the war is having on Russia itself, and the fact that this war costs a lot of money. Today, what Putin now hears from the American president and from the Europeans is that we will do whatever it takes for Ukraine to be as strong as possible when peace deals taking place or peace negotiations will start, to be in the best possible place at that moment. And then on top of that, the threat of sanctions in 50 days on those who are still buying, so like Brazil and India and China, from Russia. So if I was in the Kremlin today, I would not be too happy, because this is a clear signal that President Trump is serious. He wants peace. He hates the fact that so many people lose their lives in Ukraine.
You mentioned the NATO political success for President Trump. The New York Times writes it this way: since his first term, Mr. Trump has been pressing for the allies to spend more on their own defense. After one-day meeting in the Netherlands, they agreed to raise their spending on the military to 5% of their national income by 2035. The amount consists of 3.5% on traditional military needs like troops, weapons, shells, and missiles, up sharply from the current target of 2%. I mean, describe that for the layperson in America, how big a deal that is, that shift. It really started in the first term with President Trump, but now in this moment.
The direct impact, if I was living in America, is more jobs for the middle class. Because this will mean more production lines, more shifts in the great defense industrial base here in the US. Of course, the same in Europe, because we need the defense industrial base across the alliance, from Turkey up to and including California. Well, it will mean more jobs for the middle class in the US. President Trump was pushing Europeans to get to this famous 2%, which was the old target. Beginning of this year, 7, 8 countries were still not on that 2%, and they all came in before the summit in The Hague. And then at the summit in The Hague,
Spain was not
Spain
there.
was also Spain committed to the 2%. To
the
get there,
original,
the original 2%.
But now 5 is a little too much for them.
Well, they are saying we can get there on a lower percentage. Absolutely not true. They will not be able to do that. They will need to spend the 5%. But okay, we said, you show us you can do it for a smaller amount of money, but you will never be able to do that. That's clear. But all 32 have committed to this 5% and to that target. And this is, I think, one of the biggest foreign policy successes of President Trump. And it also means that NATO is reinvigorated because it is fair. We spend the same as the Americans are spending on the European side. And we need it to keep ourselves safe from Russia, which is investing in its defense at a staggering rate.
You said that the U.S. is not secure if the Atlantic, Europe, and the Arctic are not secured. There's an increasing realization, and let's not be naive about it, if Xi Jinping would attack Taiwan, he would first make sure that he makes a call to his very junior partner in all of this, Vladimir Putin, residing in Moscow, and telling him, hey, I'm going to do this, and I need you to keep them busy in Europe by attacking NATO territory. So you see this all linked together.
Absolutely. And most policy experts see this all linked. Because there was always the thinking the Chinese might attack Taiwan as a sort of isolated incident, which is, by the way, of course, big enough by itself. But it is clear that China is supporting Russia's war effort in Ukraine, together with North Korea and Iran. So this is North Korea, China, Iran working together with the Russians. And China is doing that for a reason. It gives them leverage over, indeed, their very junior partner, Vladimir Putin. And clearly, if they would move on Taiwan, they will force Putin to move on Europe. And for the US, NATO is there because, of course, you want Europe to be safe, but in the first place also because the US has to stay safe. And therefore, you need a safe and secure Atlantic, Arctic, and Europe.
How is President Trump seen around the world by world leaders you deal with?
I think he is very well respected. And I thought in The Hague, at the summit, 31 leaders, so the 32nd, of course, is the US, in itself, by the way, bigger than all the other 31 combined. That is how powerful this country is and this nation is in your military. But the other 31 leaders really recognizing, hey, this is somebody who is absolutely clear what he wants to achieve, is committed to NATO, but he is extremely frustrated about the fact that we were not paying up, and now we are paying up. And therefore, this commitment to NATO is ironclad.
You raised some eyebrows when you used the term daddy.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
people
probably should have
sure.
said father or the grown-up in the room. But you know, and this is the fun part about President Trump. He came back to the White House, and immediately there was this video released, Daddy is home. Yeah. And you've seen the T-shirt with Daddy on it.
So he laughed about it.
He laughs about it, and that is why I like him so much, because he has that humor and that light touch, and he's a great man.
Mr. Secretary General, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much. Good to be on the show.
We just watched major policy shift from President Trump, who spoke live from the Oval Office, joined by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. The president announced he will be allowing Ukraine to purchase more American weapons, including Patriot defense missiles. And the president tore into Russian President Vladimir Putin. He said, quote, he's very unhappy with Putin and threatened 100% tariffs on Russia if the peace deal is not agreed upon within 50 days. When asked 50 days, why that long, he said it's really not a long time. I mean, think about it. 100% tariffs could be coming. They could not sustain that with that economy. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-host Emily Campagno. Also joining us today, Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst, Alicia Acuna from the West Coast, Fox News senior correspondent, and Paul Morrow, Fox News contributor, attorney, and retired NYPD inspector and attorney. All right, so, Alicia, we look at the situation. We've been covering this for 1,220 days. So the idea of Ukraine getting crushed and needing more is not specifically new, but President Trump ran in part on saying he would end this. It's 157 days. It's not that long into his presidency, And he's given an ultimatum to a man he once described as having a good relationship with.
Yes, absolutely. And I also find it interesting, and Jackie Heinrich hit on this, that he said it didn't matter to him that the Senate, while it's doing its job and it's doing a good job considering the 500% tariffs on countries that do deals with Russia, right? He's got his own deal going on as well, with 100% tariffs on the table in 50 days. He made it very clear, we're going to hit them and we're going to hit them hard. Some of it's going to come from me, some of it could come from the Senate, but either way, you are dealing with me now. And he also made it incredibly clear that you are no longer dealing with President Biden.
Right. I think it's also important, Paul, that we not pay for this. And that seems to be critical because the president hit that point hard. Let's watch.
I am with Russia, but we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means. But today we're going to talk about something else. And as you know, we've spent $350 billion approximately on this war with Russia and Ukraine, and would like to see it end. It wasn't my war, it was Biden's war. It's not my war. I'm trying to get you out of it. And we want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there.
Paul, $350 billion the U.S. has already spent on this war. And so he's saying, no, you guys ponied up for your percentages at the G7 summit recently. That's how they'll get paid for.
This is where Donald Trump's straight-talking realpolitik really hits the ground, and it's something he doesn't get a lot of credit for because the foreign policy intelligentsia, this is all ironed out on the campuses and among the academics, all the think tanks, and they see Donald Trump as some sort of, unwashed, uneducated character or something because he doesn't speak their language. Why? Because he speaks plainly and he goes right to the truth. Trump is the first guy that we've seen relative to the Soviet Union, which is what Putin wants to reconstitute. He's the first guy who's taken NATO back to first principles, which is, we're all in this together, guys, and we're not going to pony up all the money for all of the defense. We've created in Europe a series of defense junkies, and they're all sitting around. I've been over there.
Wow.
They're sitting around saying, don't worry about it, guys. It's okay, because you know what? America will send the 82nd Airborne, and we'll get out of this. Take the money and put it into whatever. And very clearly, that's gone away. And you have to say to yourself, where were our NATO ambassadors all of this time? Did nobody come back from Europe, come back from The Hague, and say, Mr. President, I got to tell you something. They're all deadbeats. They won't even put up the 2% that they're supposed to put up.
You mean with the last administration?
With going back even further, the German politicians literally laughed at Donald Trump first time around when he said, you're going to all be beholden to Russian oil. As far as the tariffs go, one thing I would just say we have to be cautious about. Russia loves to say we can survive anything, we're self-sufficient. They'll sacrifice a whole generation over there. And they are, right now, a wartime economy. A lot of people fear that if this gets resolved, he'll start another war just to keep his economy going. So right now, the Georgians, the people in the Baltics, they're all very concerned about the fact that if you end this one, we may have another one.
So that's really interesting, Emily, because, he doesn't share a border with Germany, but he's across the Baltic Sea from Germany. And the president just said the country that is talking so strongly about what would happen if Russia doesn't come to a deal and back down is Germany. He said, I won't tell you what we would do, but they're very bold about what they would do. And I wonder if it's not that Baltic proximity that has Germany going, we're also the ones with the most weaponry, so on and so forth. What's your take?
Yeah, I think that's why we sort of saw today the signal of this hard-lined renaissance happening in the approach. And the whole point is that this is going to test the allied cohesion, indeed, absolutely that. And then the real impact of economic pressure. To that point, will it actually work, or will Putin just spin out and start other wars? I thought what was interesting is that this sort of, as we tip into this next phase, so we have military support for Ukraine, right? It's structured around financial accountability, and then the stick is sanctions. But the whole point is we're going to see the barriers along the way, the challenges, right? Do the allies have budgets? Germany has said, we are going to spend a lot, but at a certain point, there's obviously a finite end. Will the tariff timeline hold? Diplomacy with Russia may falter under inflexibility, obviously, because look at what Trump mentioned. And we talk on the phone, everything's cool, and then he goes ahead and bombs everyone. So there's not a lot of predictability with that model. If you can't predict with any type of confidence what the other person's going to do. And then I think there might be domestic criticism in just that it might undermine global diplomacy, the argument goes, and then obviously with China weighing in. So I think this is a test, but I know I have my money on the president because he won't falter. Yeah. The wild card is Putin.
So the politics of this, you know, I mean, what Emily's talking about is true. It's what's going on at home and potentially what kind of pressure that can put on a deal or the president. So we know the United Senate and House can put on their 500% tariffs on the countries that do business with Russia. And the president said, well, Senator John Thune's coming over and we're going to talk about that. Now, I assume he means to the White House. Coming over to his house, right? The people's house. But on top of that, he says, I can do my own deal. So that's what you were talking about, Alicia. And he said, and I could put that up to 100%. So if people can't afford to do business with them and they can't afford to do business with us, where are they going to get their stuff?
Well, I also think it's smart politically for President Trump to remove us slightly from saying, look, NATO is going to buy these and then these weapons and then distribute them. We're not doing it. And that's also where you see President Trump, not just the commander in chief, but the business guy, right? He's always looking out for the bottom line of Americans with they're going to buy these weapons, getting Ukraine to sign a minerals deal, getting NATO to pay more, increase their spending by 5%. So we see the business guy in President Trump. Look, I have concerns similar to what Paul expressed about, you know, is this war never ending with Russia and Ukraine? Will it ever end? You know, Russia has a larger military. They have more people to sacrifice at the altar of this war. However, I think President Trump deserves our deference. He's always right. When has he been wrong about foreign policy? His naysayers are everyone said there was going to be a World War III after, you know, sending those bombs to Iran and taking out some of their nuclear facilities or at least badly damaging them. That didn't come to fruition, right? So he's repeatedly been, or, you know, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Everyone was worried about that, right? So everyone has been wrong. He's always been right. So he deserves our deference. And then also, this is a guy who's really interested in peace, as he pointed out, ending that 30-year war between Congo and Rwanda, which he doesn't get any credit for. So, you know, look, I'm a wait and see on this, but I think he has earned our respect and he's earned our deference because he has repeatedly been right and his naysayers are wrong.
Well, look, in India and Pakistan that were ready to have a hot war, he ended that in a weekend. Look, real quickly, because I think this is worth knowing. Patriot missiles in certain countries as of 2022. So who else has these, right? So that they can, some of them are in NATO, some of them are not. The U.S., obviously, the Netherlands, which for 14 years, Rutte was their prime minister, so we know that we can get a good count on him there. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has been going around and calculating where all these things are. Germany has them, Japan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Taiwan, Greece, Spain, South Korea, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Romania, Sweden, Poland, Bahrain, and Switzerland. Just to give an idea of where there are other Patriot missile systems, because that comes into play, some of those countries in NATO. Your last quick thought.
I'm heartened to see Poland there. Look, and when I talk about Europe in terms of defense spending and defense posture, I don't mean Eastern Europe, because their proximity to Russia means that they can't afford to be overly idealistic and burn their money on, you know, Green New Deals and stuff like that. There are some very tough characters over there. They got it at the end of World War II. That's not that long ago in geopolitical time. And we have to essentially return to a 1950 posture or so in the era when you had Khrushchev banging his, you know, his shoe on the table saying, we will bury you. We're not that far distant from that.
Wow. Very much, John. Let's bring in Dan Hoffman now, Fox News contributor and former CIA station chief in Moscow. Thank you very much for being here, Dan. First up, I mean, how concerned are you about this new and seems to be growing assassination threat from Iran against President Trump?
Well, I think you definitely have to be concerned. Iran has threatened former National Security Advisor John Bolton, as well as former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, as well as President Trump. But I also believe that the timing of this alleged crowdfunding and overt threat against the president is deliberate. The United States, with our kinetic strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, reestablished escalation dominance. And Iran, I think, is seeking to gain some leverage to demonstrate that they could potentially hurt us in anticipation of nuclear discussions with us, negotiations over the future of their nuclear program. They don't have any other leverage. We've eliminated that. Israel has destroyed Iran's proxy terrorist network as well as their air defenses, and we have the upper hand. And I think that's why we're seeing this threat. Now, I expect President Trump to be working closely with law enforcement as well as the intelligence community, just to learn more details about how serious this threat is. But again, we have to be very, very vigilant.
It sounds like that is the case. U.S. Secret Service did pass along a statement to Fox, and it reads, in part, quote, "We operate in a heightened and very dynamic threat environment, and the safety and security of the president and all of our protectees remains our highest priority. To preserve operational integrity, we can't comment on specific protective intelligence matters. However, our teams work around the clock with international, federal, state, and local partners to ensure the highest levels of protection." But to your point, Dan, this was a senior State Department official, an official statement from the State Department on this as well, saying a senior State Department official is telling the Washington Free Beacon that the Trump administration is aware of these threats and committed to, quote, "holding bad actors accountable." This means using every tool at our disposal, including sanctions, to implement the president's maximum pressure strategy. We're learning about this blood covenant, Dan, obviously, at the same time that President Trump says he's hopeful of a ceasefire in these talks between Israel and Hamas potentially happening this week. How hopeful are you?
So first of all, just to reiterate something that you highlighted in the previous segment with Tom Homan, if you're, you shouldn't be just playing defense. You got to go on offense.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that the United States won't seek to disrupt these threats. And I'm sure that we're mounting a full court press to do just that. When it comes to an Israel deal with Hamas, it's possible, but Hamas wants Israel out of the Gaza Strip, and they want a permanent ceasefire. Israel's not willing to do that. We also don't know what the Gaza Strip is going to look like, what the day after looks like. Israel wants to ensure that there could be no future terrorist threat emanating from Gaza against Israel. And so what I expect is it's possible through very intense diplomacy from the Trump administration that we may arrive at some middle ground where we have a short-term ceasefire for 30 or 60 days and a prisoner exchange where Israel releases perhaps as many as 1,000 Palestinians in return for some of the hostages who are still alive.
This also, before I let you go, as the administration seems to be cranking up pressure on Russia, teasing this major statement or announcement, Dan, today as these drone strikes hit Ukraine. I just want to roll this on President Trump earlier on how he will respond if Putin escalates. Listen here.
How far are you willing to go if Putin were to escalate, send more bombs in the coming days?
Don't ask me a question like that. How far? I want to get the war settled. There are a lot of people dying and on something that should be able to be settled.
They seem to be keeping details under wraps, Dan, but what are your thoughts as we do anticipate what's next here?
Well, I think the president delivered a pretty powerful message by announcing with Secretary General of NATO, Rutte, that the United States would be providing Ukraine via NATO members in Europe with not just defensive weapons, but missiles and munitions as well. And the president said that we'll be looking out 50 days from now at massive secondary sanctions against Russia. That's important because some of those countries who import Russian uranium and gas and oil, that would be China, for example, and India, may be in a position to influence Vladimir Putin's decision-making over the next 50 days. And I'm sure that we'll be on heightened alert overseas with our intelligence collection and our diplomats for reflections of just how not just Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin are responding to this announcement today, but also Russia's closest allies, Iran, as well as China.
All right, Dan, we'll be watching for all of that as the day goes on and the week progresses. Thank you so much, Dan. Let's bring in now the United States Ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker. Thank you very much, Matt, for being here. This was President Trump, more from him, SOT 1 guys, on this deal. This was in the Oval Office. You were there on this weapons deal to Ukraine. More details, listen.
We've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them. The United States will not be having any payment made. We're not buying it, but we will manufacture it, and they're going to be paying for it.
So what do you want people to know about this deal?
Well, I think it's very important to know, first of all, you know, kind of the days of the United States sending unlimited taxpayer dollars to defend Ukraine are over. President Trump has made a very smart decision and an agreement with NATO, which says Europe and Canada will pay for the weapons. The United States will manufacture them. Obviously, we make the best weapons systems in the world, and everyone wants them, and we're going to prioritize those going to Ukraine. And what this says also to Vladimir Putin, I think, is very loud and clear, which is, you know, we've given you a chance for peace. President Trump is a peacemaker, but if you want war, we will arm Ukraine, and Europe will pay for it. And it's actually, I think, a great step in ultimately bringing this war to a conclusion, to an end. You know, in the last 18 months, Russia has gained about 1% of Europe, of Ukrainian land. I mean, they're making no success. They're losing thousands of soldiers every single day, and way too many, private citizens in Ukraine and the big cities are being injured. So I think this is a great next step in finally ending this war. But again, if Vladimir Putin wants to continue to fight on the battlefields of Ukraine, the United States of America will sell Europe armaments so that they can be used by Ukraine to defend themselves.
Matt, like his predecessor, Jens Stoltenberg, Mark Rutte appears to be a big fan of the president. Here's what he said after the announcement.
This is really big. You called me on Thursday that you had taken a decision. And the decision is that you want Ukraine what it needs to have to maintain, to be able to defend itself against Russia, but you don't want the Europeans to pay for it, which is totally logical. And this is building on the tremendous success of the NATO summit.
I mean, this changes the status quo quite dramatically. It used to be that the Europeans would like to have Ukraine have weapons, but they're very happy to have the United States pay for it. Now they're ponying up for it. So that's different. But how also do you think Putin's going to react to this?
Yeah. Well, obviously, he's going to react to not only the United States weapons being readily available to the Ukrainians at Europe's expense, he's also going to respond, obviously, to this tariff, and especially as the people that are enabling him, China, India, and others that are buying his oil. But, you know, this is a natural progression of what we did in The Hague at the NATO summit, too. It's, you know, we moved the burden off the American taxpayer for European defense and onto European taxpayers where it should be. And the traditional defense of Europe is now going to be borne by the European population. And at the same time, we're doing the same thing with the Ukrainian war. You know, President Trump said today, $350 billion of American taxpayers' money has gone to the support Ukraine. No longer, but at the same time, we're not cutting them off from weapons, and we're also not making the United States of America less secure. We're going to make sure that strategically we have enough that we need, and then anything else that we can make, manufacture, and sell to our European allies and give to Ukraine, I think is a perfect and elegant solution for this.
And now there's this idea of secondary tariffs, 50-day deadline. This may be the leverage that President Trump thinks he has with Vladimir Putin and Russia. And to John's point about this relationship with the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, President Trump has spoken very highly of their relationship in the past. Here's just more of a sampling from the Oval Office, an exchange on this war, and it just keeps going on and on. Listen.
I don't know about you, Mark, but I felt that we had a deal about 4 times. And here we are, still talking about it.
And he didn't send serious people to the negotiations. So
we thought, and I thought, we should have had a deal done a long time ago. But it just keeps going on and on.
Feel free to weigh in on that, Matt, but also having been in that Oval Office when all of this was going down, how important is it that they really seem to have developed a very strong relationship, the two of them?
Yeah, and obviously, General Secretary Rutte is a very good politician. He was 14 years as the Dutch Prime Minister, and he knows how European politics works, and he can obviously bring people to the table in Europe. Obviously, President Trump is the master deal maker, and I think he saw an opportunity here to not only bring jobs to Middle America through making weapon systems. You know, I've seen some of those manufacturing things like in Lima, Ohio, where they build tanks, for example. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to help the U.S. economy, but at the same time help Ukraine, and Europe's going to pay for it. And so, but obviously Secretary Rutte is a very important piece of this, and I look, every day that I work with him is enjoyable because he's such a professional, and he is equally working hard to make NATO strong and make, most importantly, Europe strong. Because President Trump said it today when we were talking to him, and that is that a strong Europe, a Europe that can deter Russia, frees up the United States to address all of our strategic concerns across the globe, and that's a good thing for everyone.
I mean, it is so interesting to see opponents of the president whining about him insisting that NATO nations pony up and do their share. But the people who seem to like it are the people who are running NATO. Matt, great to catch up with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
Meantime, senior White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich was at today's event in the Oval Office. She starts us off inside the White House briefing room. Good evening, Jackie.
Good evening, Brett. The president, who sharply criticized past assistance to Ukraine, often calling Zelensky a salesman, insulated himself from criticism over this policy shift, emphasizing that he's authorizing the sale of U.S. weapons to NATO allies, whose leaders he also praised after they stepped up their defense commitments.
We had a deal about 4 times.
President Trump is stepping up Ukraine's defenses with billions of dollars worth of U.S. weapons bought and distributed by NATO allies. Trump now fed up with Putin's games.
My conversations with him are always very pleasant. I might tell the First Lady, I spoke to Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, oh, really? Another city was just hit. So it's like, look, he's, I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy.
Trump also giving Putin 50 days to reach a deal or face 100% secondary sanctions on any country doing business with Russia, a hefty consequence for major purchasers of Russian oil like China and India. The package is separate from the 500% secondary sanctions leaders in the Senate and House have been withholding for Trump's green light.
I'm not sure we need it, but it's certainly good that they're doing it. And I think they've actually crafted a pretty good piece of legislation. Is probably going to pass very easily, and that includes Democrats.
The president said Ukraine should begin receiving Patriot missile systems within days, replacements now heading to NATO countries as soon as this afternoon. A major development after the Pentagon briefly paused arms deliveries for a stockpile review early this month, an apparent surprise to the president.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. What did you tell me?
Trump indicated today this impending deal played a role.
I knew what Pete was doing. Was evaluation, because we knew this was going to happen. Obviously, that has a big impact on, when you say pause, obviously you're not going to be doing things if you don't know what's going to happen here. But we were pretty sure this was going to happen, so we did a little bit of a pause.
A White House official tells Fox the president ordered a review of U.S. stockpiles following the Iran strikes, and Pentagon officials believed that they were adhering to the president's wishes when they paused those arms deliveries for the purposes of that review. But there was no broader policy decision to pause military aid to Ukraine. Brett.
Jackie Heinrich, live in the White House briefing room. Jackie, thank you. You think that the sanctions on other countries doing deals with Russia will create additional pressure, exponential?
Absolutely. This is significant. So today, if you are in Beijing or in Delhi or you're in Brazil and you know that this is coming to you, you might want to call Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and say, hey, friend, we are still buying stuff from you, but you have got to get serious when it comes to these negotiations on a ceasefire or a peace deal, or otherwise we get hit by these secondary sanctions.
President Trump stepping up the pressure there. You see the NATO Secretary General on set. Axios writes it this way. Trump to supply missiles to Ukraine gives Russia a 50-day ultimatum. This is a seismic policy shift from President Trump, who originally refused to side with Ukraine and until very recently insisted he would only supply defensive weapons so as not to escalate the war. Trump also said he was giving Russia 50 days to make a deal or else face 100% secondary tariffs, seemingly referring to a plan to impose tariffs on countries like China and India that buy Russian oil. That would have a major impact on global oil markets. With that, let's bring in our panel. Fox News contributor Mary Catherine Ham, Dasha Burns, White House bureau chief for Politico, and Guy Benson, also a Fox News contributor. All right, Mary Catherine, it seems like it is a big turning point and may make a big difference.
Yeah, I went back to 2018 actually to reflect on how we got here when Trump first went to NATO, and 5 countries were committing 2% at that point. And now you've got this big shift that the Secretary General noted with everybody but Spain saying we can get to 5%. And I think that's interesting because I was a person who back then was worried about his rhetoric on NATO and who still worries about his rhetoric on Ukraine and Russia. But he has created a situation where he can do this deal that puts pressure on Putin, because I think he feels like he's been worked over a little bit in that area. And he can do it in a way that is politically fine for him to do, even with his base, because Europe is paying for it, and strategically helpful to the Ukraine, which is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, Dasha, it is a change for this White House in positioning. And the question is, what happens after the 50 days? Does he agree to this Lindsey Graham bipartisan bill to put the pressure on, or does he do it himself?
Well, I just spoke to a senior White House official about just that, Brett. And the point here is, I asked whether the shift was due to something. Did Putin say something? Did something happen? And they said, no, look, it's just time. And Russia at this point is now committing some of the worst atrocities against civilians of this entire war. And Trump feels like he's been tapped along by Putin. At the same time, Trump does feel like Putin is the bigger fish with the upper hand here. And so he doesn't want to go full blunt force trauma against Russia right away, which is why we've really seen him hedge on this idea of sanctions. What I know is behind the scenes, the White House is very much in contact with Lindsey Graham about this, but they want the language changed to give Trump the ultimate say, to give him the maximum optionality so that it's on the table. He can threaten Putin with it, but if Putin comes to the negotiating table in full good faith, then maybe it's a different story.
You know, the NATO Secretary General said the president gave Putin chances on multiple phone calls, but then noticed the attacks that came right after those phone calls as an affront to him and to the thought that he's going to get to the table, and he frankly was angry about it.
Yeah, I think the NATO chief, to make this point, is very good. He's very smooth and not in a smarmy way. Some people say, oh, he's playing to Trump's ego, where he often echoes what the president has said, giving Trump credit for things. I'm sure there's some of that involved, but he's also willing to recognize successes where they exist in a way that a lot of other elites around the world simply won't do with this president, especially when you think about elitists in Europe, right? The default setting has been vis-a-vis President Trump, smug, condescension, sneering. And the NATO chief, the Secretary General, has completely rejected that. And wouldn't you guess it, he has actually been much more successful in bringing President Trump to the table and around to a position that has really strengthened NATO. So he has been, I think, an extremely effective operator in that role.
Let's turn to another story that's gathering a lot of attention, and that's the Epstein files and the controversy around it. You know the thing has changed when the House Minority Leader is now talking about this story. Take a listen.
Democrats didn't put the Jeffrey Epstein thing into the public domain. This was a conspiracy that Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and these MAGA extremists have been fanning the flames of for the last several years. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. The American people deserve to know the truth.
So Politico writes this. There's a MAGA rebellion over the Epstein outcry. The split over Epstein represents one of the biggest rifts within Trump supporters since the president took office for a second term. On one side are MAGA supporters who push claims that Epstein was murdered in his jail cell and that the disgraced financier had kept a list of high-profile clients, but Trump's DOJ and FBI have concluded that there's no evidence for either. Mary Catherine.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on here. Many people look at this and go, on its face, it looks like it was handled at least incompetently, if not corruptly, from day one, regardless of leadership. And they want answers because there are real victims who we will probably never know much about because they signed NDAs and because very powerful people were involved. And also, there was an easy answer for the Trump administration here, which was Ghislaine Maxwell is appealing. We cannot release anything while that is ongoing. Right? I think that would have been the clean answer. Now they're in this situation where a bunch of people are deeply invested in this particular story, which there may be plenty more too, as a decoder ring for all that is corrupt in government. And if they don't get answers on that, they'll be very mad. Here's the other thing, though. There's a large portion of that portion of the base that will listen to Trump when he gives them an answer on this. And the question is, how politically salient is that?
And does he have the benefit of the doubt, Dasha?
Here's the tension. The White House wants to move on from this. One senior official tells me that they understand it's important to the base, and that doesn't mean they're going to ignore it, but they want to move past it. They also feel like this is very much an online kind of outrage. Not that the issue is not important to the base, but that the outcry and the rage factor is very much an online thing led by these influencers. But the reality of it is that the people in middle America that voted for Trump are not as invested in this as they are in the economy and healthcare. The other piece of it is the more that this administration doesn't want to talk about this, the more that online group wants to talk about it and chat about it and feels like there's more of a there. And it's not. I've talked to many of these influencers. They're just not ready to let go of this yet.
So how much does it come up on your radio show?
People want to talk about it, certainly online. But look, something very dark and evil happened connected to this man for a very long time, and he was protected and others around him for reasons that are highly mysterious and suspicious. People are right, I think, to be a bit conspiratorial. Myself, I'm not characteristically a conspiratorial person. I'm in the market for conspiracies on this one, always have been, because there's something that has never been right about it. The problem is, if you're the Trump administration and several key figures in that orbit, if you dangle this in front of the base and make it into an issue and print up the binders of the files and everything, and then at the last minute kind of say, oh, never mind, there's nothing, a lot of people aren't just going to accept that.
Yeah. All right, quickly, lightning round. Andrew Cuomo getting into this mayor's race as an independent.
I mean, good luck, New York. He is riddled with his own problems and corruption. He's not well liked, as illustrated by the fact that the socialists beat him. And I just think he's going down a bad path, because the one-on-one is how you beat him on down.
I mean, it's going to split the vote even more, Batasha.
Nobody asked for this, and nobody wants it.
Yep.
He's repellent for good reason. The only chance of beating Mamdani is a one-on-one shot. And all the alternatives are quite unpopular. Advantage Mamdani.
You guys are really pro-Cuomo. I got that panel sense today. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.